Welcome to Syntax. Today we've got Ben. we got a crazy week here at Syntax here. We're going to React Miami and Scott's flying out tomorrow. I'm flying out the day after that. So we're just recording for the week, getting ahead of everything. And we had a guest cancel and we can't leave you folks without a show. So we got you the next best thing, Ben. Ben is our manager here at Syntax, and he holds everything together. And we've had Ben on the show previously as well, before Syntax was even part of Sentry. And he told us all about some interesting stuff about how Sentry saves his stuff in the database and the stack there, and his time at FreshBooks and all kinds of interesting stuff. So we have him on again today we're going to talk about some Cloudflare stuff that he's working on, some really interesting. A lot of people are really interested in like the new stuff Cloudflare's been putting out, as well as we'll talk a little bit about Syntax. We've been doing this for 1 year now, and we'll sort of look back on it. So welcome, Ben. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for saving our butts.
Hey guys, this is weird. We were just in a Slack channel together, and now we're recording this.
You want to give a quick introduction to who you are, what you do?
Yeah, sure. My name is Ben Vinegar. I've been working in software and web development for painfully like 20 years. I really don't like how that number has gotten pretty high lately. And I don't know, quick bio, trying to retread a little bit of that last episode. Mm-hmm. But I got into software to make video games. That was my original career ambition. Didn't really work out. Got into web development. Was an early employee at this startup called FreshBooks, and then Discuss, doing embedded comments. And for the last 8.5 years, I've been at Sentry, where I've done everything from work on our client SDK development, specifically the JavaScript stuff, working on the product UI, building the product. And then I also kind of became our first engineering manager and had a stint as our VP of engineering for 4 years. And now I work with you all.
Yeah. Now you get to herd the podcasters. So
yeah,
it's a nice
it's a lot of
upgrade.
fun.
Yeah. Ben, do you want to give a shot at doing a Sentry presented by?
Oh man. Well, I don't know. This is getting a little questionable here, but I'll give it a shot. Look, this podcast is brought to you by Sentry. If you're a software developer and you're pushing things into production, your software is going to break. I've been building some software lately, and it broke a lot faster than I was expecting, frankly. It's a really harsh reminder of how easily that happens. And Sentry is just something that helps you understand how your software is performing in production, whether it's telling you about errors and exceptions that you have, or telling you that your website is slow, gives you tools to just sort of become informed, really, which is the most important thing, and then gives you tools to remediate those problems and get your software back on track.
I love it.
Very well done.
If you want to give Sentry a try, head on over to sentry.io/syntax. Sign up to get 2 months for free. Man, that was excellent, Ben. Thank you. I mean, it's reasonable considering, you've worked at Sentry for so long now, so you know the product.
I do know the product. I've also heard you guys say a version of that line probably 50 to 100 times at this point. So
you've given us notes.
More than that. Like how many times? Like Sentry sponsored the podcast for probably 4 years, and they sponsored at least 50 episodes a year. So yeah, we've probably done like a Sentry read.
Oh yeah, but I said I've heard.
Yeah, you've heard. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There you go. Awesome. So I want to talk first about Cloudflare Analytics Engine, because I don't know what it is that caused you to sort of dip into it, but you created this thing called Counterscale, which is scalable web analytics. And I think you just sort of built it on being like, this is an interesting product from Cloudflare that seems to be extremely cheap. And you went off and built this thing that seems to have caught on. So do you want to give a rundown of what that is?
Yeah, I think even some background, I'm always interested when people make new stuff in this industry. And when Workers first came out, I thought those were super neat, and I played around with that. I want to say in the summer of the pandemic, I think I went deep. This could have been like 2020. Just sort of interested in when new infrastructure comes out, like what does that make possible, right? I'd kind of relaunched my personal website, which is, no, I'm not going to plug that. We'll save it.
What is it? benv.ca. Plug away.
Yeah,
I mean, I think this even goes back to syntax, which is, working with you all, wanting to do more in HTML and CSS and revamping the website, really early way to get started with that. And I didn't want to use Google Analytics for a variety of reasons. For example, Sentry stopped using Google Analytics. We've stopped using marketing cookies on our website. We've written about that. And I kind of want to do the same thing. And I was looking at, okay, if you don't want Google Analytics, how do you actually know how many people have visited your website? Turns out the solutions are commercial paid offerings, which, start at like, I don't know, $5, $10, $15 US a month, which seemed, I don't know, a little, look, my website gets like 30 visits a month.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Just to be clear here. And something about just sort of spending, more money than my hosting provider, right? Like I'm not paying anything to host the website, but to actually host my analytics, that costs money. And I don't know. I mean, those commercial products, Fathom, Plausible, they're good products. I want to be clear, but they do charge money. Mm-hmm. And I was just sort of curious why there wasn't, just something sort of easy to use. Now I understand there is some baked in analytics with Vercel and other platforms and stuff, but I was just using some old cooked website provider, and I wanted my own thing that I could drop on my page.
Yeah, you don't want to be, I don't know, reliant upon your host just for your analytics, at least in my opinion. Especially, you want to have it somewhat portable, right?
Yeah, I wasn't I wasn't using a baked in solution. So even if I don't even think my headspace was there, Scott, to be like, oh, I'm going to use this built-in thing. I just totally went to what is an external Google Analytics thing that I could drop. So that's the preamble to, I was lamenting this problem with some other, early Sentry people. And, one thing about Sentry is that we ingest a lot of data, and I've learned a little bit about the challenges of that, what a high throughput ingestion stack kind of looks like. And I am not an expert, to be clear. I just wave my hands a lot. But I do know a couple things, okay? Which is that if you want to ingest a lot of data really quickly, you want to write that immediately. You don't want to have to, have an endpoint that handles data, and now you got to query a database. You just want to write it and then let some other job deal with it later. So usually that's a queue, right? So this is often why you'll see Kafka rolled up into sort of, or similar kind of like systems like that to just sort of accept data into a big queue. And then you got a bunch of workers that work on that data, write it to a database, maybe do some kind of computation or whatever. This is a long preamble, I'm sorry, but
no, it's interesting.
I was interested in sort of like what would an open source kind of like analytics thing look like, but I knew that those kind of systems need to ingest data quickly and at scale. And there is no way in hell that I want to learn how to run Kafka or how to run all this complicated infrastructure.
Yeah.
Riffing around and be like, it'd be really neat if there's just some hosted service that understood this pattern that would let me just sort of ingest data at scale and write it, and I could read it back in kind of a queryable way. So I started exploring tools online. The story here is it began with the problem. I don't know that I necessarily started with Cloudflare. However, I do like Cloudflare stuff, so I definitely went there pretty early. And then I found this service called Analytics Engine, which was in beta at the time. And I didn't quite understand it when I first saw it, but effectively, this is what I just described. It is a system that lets you write data events onto a schema that they've defined, and I can come back to that. They queue it up, they ingest it, they write it into their own Clickhouse, managed Clickhouse database that they're running.
So it is Clickhouse?
That's what they put on their docs, as far as I understand. That's the underlying technology where all the sort of, all the event data is written.
And what is Clickhouse for anyone? Sounds fun.
Yeah, so Clickhouse is a columnar. Here's another one to, how do you pronounce this? Column store database. It's an open source project. It was spun out of Yandex several years ago. Sentry and I think PostHog, like a bunch of products are built on this, analytics products. It is, if you think about the name, it's Clickhouse. It's designed to store clicks. It is like an analytics sort of database. Mm-hmm. What's different about it from MySQL or Postgres or those sort of traditional relational databases is that the data is stored in columns instead of rows. Mm-hmm. If you think about when you're querying a Postgres database, you're kind of saying like, hey, select star from this table And then, okay, this is the the most basic query ever, but Postgres will basically just like, or the underlying database engine will sort of, scan every single row, collect all of those, right? Now, let's say that you want to select one attribute. You're like, oh, select browser name from clicks from Postgres, okay? Postgres still has to go through every row to accumulate those names.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So, at the end of the day, there is still a file system. There's, or how this data is stored in memory is that it has to rip through every single row of data. But a column store database is different because it's storing sort of all the unique column events in a row column oriented. So if you wanted to sort of figure out every single unique column name, this would be great with some visualizations on the screen. I don't know if this is making sense, but it doesn't have to go through every row of the database. It just has to go through the unique values of that column. This is a real deep dive into this right away, and I hope I'm not butchering this horribly.
No, it's super interesting.
Yeah, we first heard about Clickhouse when we heard that Sentry was using Clickhouse, and that was the first time it crossed my radar in general. But I've never even really thought about a column-oriented database as being a thing. Is it specific? You said it is like an analytics, widely used for analytics companies. Is it something that's practical to be used outside of analytics?
I think so. This is I have not really used this very much. This is a really tricky thing where it's sort of I guess I've sort of managed a team that's worked with it, but that doesn't mean that I know, its API or exactly those details. But it does, what I understand is that it does have a SQL-like language. This is the part where our producer could pull this up and verify this for us. But basically how you work with Clickhouse is very different from how you would work with MySQL or Postgres. It's not a situation where you can just I got this data and I'll just load it up over here and it will work the same way with the same queries. You have to work with it differently. It has different sort of advantages and limitations. Is it used outside of that setting? It probably shouldn't be. It's really, I'm not an expert, but I think you really would want to derive some real benefit that you're getting out of using it. It's not a real alternative, I think, for 95% of what web development is out there. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Cool.
So I was checking out this analytics engine docs, and I think, I think how even Cloudflare built it was more hey, if you're building products on Cloudflare, you can track your own analytics from your products into this system, and you can bring that back to your users. You could use this for usage tables, if you've got some kind of event-based system or who knows, right? So they were thinking about it that way. At least that's how the docs kind of read. But I was looking at it and I thought, this could be, why couldn't we just sort of use this as a way of forwarding web browser traffic analytic events? It just kind of works. That's the cool thing about it. You just kind of blast it with data and it ingests it all. It stands up. It doesn't seem to really fall down. And then you can read it back. It does expose a SQL-like sort of query language that you can use to read back that data, and you can group it. You can sum on it. You can do a whole bunch of cool math on it. And that's really what is driving Counterscale. It is a very sort of very simple application. Couldn't maybe just 2,000 lines of code. That is, wow. It is a script that you drop on the page. That script forwards events to a Cloudflare worker. That worker writes to Analytics Engine, and then the dashboard reads back from that engine using a SQL dialect.
Wow.
Wow.
And
yeah.
And what kind of events are you tracking with this? Does it default to anything, or do you have to explicitly go and say, I want to track page views and hover over top of navigation items and time spent on page, things like that?
So Analytics Engine has a fixed schema. And what that means is, and my understanding is that Clickhouse also needs schemas, just like Postgres or MySQL. You got to define what's in here. So wait, quick answer is you got to write your own stuff. It's sort of like a free form object store for you to store data that you want. Mm-hmm. So Counterscale is the script is basically pulling browser, device, stuff like that, and then pushing that into Analytics Engine. But Analytics Engine actually just the schema is sort of, it's like blob 1, blob 2, blob 3, blob 4, blob 5, double 1, double 2, double 3. It's basically just got free form text and number columns that you can use that they've already defined in their schema that are sort of fixed, but you can make them whatever you want, right? I don't know if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it's wild. It's so wild to think about Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me. Like the schema itself. So like, let's say you want to track, somebody visits the website, you want to track what the browser user agent is, the version of the browser that they're on, maybe the city that they've been visiting from. How do you then make that schema in the analytics engine?
You basically have your own code do translation for what you want those things to be.
Okay.
Right? So when you write them, I happen to know that browser name is stored in blob6. Okay. And blob is just a free-form string column. Okay. And they have basically something like, I don't know the exact number, but 24 blob columns you can use and 24 double columns you can use. And that's it. There are a bunch of limitations on this database that are like, even an individual row, I think, can only be 5,000 characters. So it has a whole bunch of wacky limitations that you have to be aware of. But if the software that you're writing works within those constraints, then you get all these incredible properties, right? You can write sort of near infinite data points. You can aggregate 1 million data points and read them back and be like, oh, 1 million people visited my website yesterday, and it will probably return, in a second or two. That's pretty wild.
Okay. And I understand what a double is. Like a double would be a number. But what is a blob and what is an index?
Oh, this is trivia time, Wes.
Yeah.
I wasn't prepared for this. I'm not pulling up the ClickHouse docs here, right? But in my mind, these are effectively just sort of like they're under the hood. There are these primitive types that exist inside of ClickHouse, right? And double is some kind of number, integer, whatever.
Yeah.
And blob, I think, it's either, it could just be binary data. It could be a string, right? I think it's equivalent to the blob. I think there's a blob column type in Postgres.
Yeah.
That is similar, right? So it's just kind of exposing these really raw primitives you can choose what to do with. The number columns, doubles, like you can do sum and average. You can actually do math.
Oh, okay.
So it does allow for you to do some SQL-like computation inside of the analytics engine. So when you query it, you actually send it a SQL query. If I wanted, for example, every unique browser name out of this thing, it's like select, and I happen to know that I personally as a developer have put browser name on blob6, which is a string, then I could say, select count, comma, blob6 from this data set, and then group by blob6, and then I'll get in the results effectively like a table output of every unique browser name and then the count, right?
Okay.
Wild that you have to use the blob6 instead of like naming the columns, right?
Yeah, if you look at the code that I've written, it is a bunch of string, shoving column names in there to make the code look somewhat like it makes sense.
Yeah. I pulled up the schema and it's like host blob1, user agent blob2. It's like,
I
man.
see. And I'm just looking at the docs for ClickHouse here, and it looks like there is additional data types for things like geolocation and like, is there only 3 or is there like dozens of them that are available? I don't even know if you know this, but like I see there's 4 different geolocation types: point, ring, polygon, and multi-polygon, which could be helpful for like geolocation data.
Gee, I don't know. Was this in Analytics Engine or is this?
No, this is just on ClickHouse's engine or ClickHouse. So maybe the Cloudflare one is a little bit more restricted, which is often the case with Cloudflare stuff. It's like, hey, this is extremely cheap, extremely fast. Given these caveats, work within these boundaries, and you will have a good day.
Yeah, in this case, you're right, and they have an index. If you look up, there's like a SQL API for this analytics engine.
Okay.
They only support blob and double. They do expose this index column, which they describe as the index value that was logged with the event. The value in this column is used as a key for sampling. They also sample data. This is part of how the system works for you at scale. Basically, if they ingest a ton of data points and that data looks similar, they will, sort of sample that data, and they don't have to store every single data point. I'm getting a little deep here. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah,
no, it's interesting. Yeah.
The sampling, we talked to Armin from Sentry on it, and we're just like, how how do you not like DDoS Sentry when like your Sentry is putting a script on like half of the internet, and every time there's an error or anytime there's like if you're doing the session replay, right, where the mouse goes or where you clicked on a thing, so much data is being sent. I was like, how is it possible that you can store and process that much data at once? You know, like it's a fire hose of data. And I thought it was really interesting how he explained how they're using queues and sampling and whatnot to be able to just like ingest all of that data. And he also told us a story about how there was a huge backlog at once where it had to be, and it could still be processed once everything got back up and running.
All these services use sampling. So when I launched this project, somebody came out of the woodwork and was like, you better explain that this uses sampling. And I'm like, okay, I'll put an issue about that. And the concern there, it just means like at high throughput, the system is going to throw out some numbers, or it's going to make estimates, is how I would kind of simplify it. But everything does that. Google Analytics is not storing every data point of every visitor that ever visited your website, right? It's not effective for that. It's not effective for them to do that. I also think this is why I'm sure you guys have encountered this. You ever have a situation where you have a bunch of sort of like analytics trackers or counters or been in a company where it's like, why don't these add up?
Yeah.
Why is it that your system is telling me a different number than this system? And everyone's kind of pointing fingers at each other. I don't know. Maybe I've been in a bunch of sort of meetings or stuff where that's happened.
Yeah.
The answer sampling. Well,
it could be among a great many other things, but that's one of them. Yeah.
So are these all decisions that were influenced by working on Sentry? I mean, I know Sentry and an analytics tool have a lot in common. So
I think it's that. So when I did look at open source analytics trackers, like I think Plausible is open source and they run it as a commercial offering as well too. And so I poked at that source code just to sort of understand how they did it. And I think at least an early version of that was Postgres. Right. So if you think about it, most people, if they sit down, I'm going to write an analytics tracker, and you think about what you know, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to write this to a database. But what happens when that just sort of explodes with data? It's not really the best. I've seen enough from my work to say, like, at low volumes, that's perfectly fine. But at high volumes, it's not really relational data, if that makes sense. It's not really what that database was designed for. And while I don't really think this is going to be a problem for the 30 people who visit my blog every every month, I guess I wanted to just sort of explore what a fire and forget system would look like. Like, could you just press a button and deploy this kind of software stack? And if somehow you showed up on the top of Reddit tomorrow, it would be okay. If that makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. The hug of death.
Yeah. We talked about this on the last time I was on the show, but I'm a very lazy person, and I work hard to be lazy. And what that means is I don't want to have to monitor my databases and sort of figure out how to back them up or figure out. I just don't want to do any of this, right?
Yeah.
I just wanted a software system that I could put live, forget about it. And I've been running this for about, I think 3 months, and I've literally never had to do anything with it. So it's sort of fulfilled that from my side. So yeah, I think I just kind of looked at this as like, what would be the system that would allow for this type of software to exist in just a fire and forget kind of way? And I think that Analytics Engine is the technology that allows that.
That's cool. It seems also Cloudflare does provide the sample interval and some functions to scale them up. So if you have 7 million events and it only sampled 90% of those, it will allow you to scale it up as if it were the actual traffic. I don't know if I've ever had such large traffic that I've needed to worry about that, but one day
some folks do. Yeah,
I wish my stats will be sampled. But let's talk about like pricing for this type of thing. I know that you have said it was extremely cheap.
Yeah.
Can you run this for free for most websites?
The way that it works, it is a worker and a analytics engine write. So every time that like a user visits your website and sort of requests that tracking script, the tracking script makes a request to a worker. That worker does some really light, data munging, and then it writes a data point to Analytics Engine. So that's one worker invocation, and that's one analytics engine write per analytics event, if that makes sense. Okay. As I understand, on Cloudflare's free plan right now, for free, if you just sign up, you get 100,000 worker invocations per day. I think Analytics Engine also gives you get 100,000 writes as well per month on the free plan. So, in the magical world where you just got the perfect amount of data, or 100,000 people visited your website every day, is anyone going to need that?
Yeah,
probably not.
That's a lot. and to be clear for the audience who might not, have used a lot of these things, you don't have to have your website hosted on Cloudflare. This is just for the tool itself. The tool itself, Counterscale, you host it on a worker. So Cloudflare is only there to host the tool, which is free to use outside of your usage.
That is an important clarifying comment that I probably should have opened with earlier. Yeah, it's basically like 3 commands from the command line. Like you clone this, you run a bunch of commands, you generate an API key, and then it's just up there and it's just working. And then you drop the script in your website. So yeah, this is just referring to just this thing, just Counterscale. This is what it costs to host it. Those numbers are absurd, right? Like,
it's absurd. Yeah.
Yeah. The $5 a month, that's the thing about Cloudflare Workers is you can do quite a bit on the free plan, and I'm pretty sure it's a $5 subscription.
Jeez.
Yeah, $5 for like their base plan, and then with that you get 10 million per month, which is 330,000 requests on a worker per day. So you immediately have 3x'd that for $5 a month. And then I don't know what the analytics engine, let's see here, 10 million. You get 10 million on that. So yeah, you get quite a bit for $5 a month. And if you're sort of weighing both like the privacy angle, right? I guess you're storing it yourself. You're not really storing it yourself. I guess you're giving it to Cloudflare, but it seems a little bit different. And you get full control over it. And if you want, like we just talked about ad blockers blocking analytics, and we're trying to like proxy it through a different URL on a previous show, like you have full control over it. So if you do need to try to get around ad blocker, I'm sure you could do that with this. Let's talk a little bit about just like Cloudflare in general and infrastructure of how it costs. Like a lot of people are talking about their server prices are going up. A lot of people are going back to maybe should I be self-hosting? How much does this stuff cost? Why? It seems like everybody's just like, yeah, Cloudflare is a fraction of the price of everything else. Like, why? Why is Cloudflare so cheap?
I don't work there. Yeah. However, I'm gonna offer my own random theories. One is that they actually manage their own infrastructure, by which I mean the hardware, right? So they're not built on AWS or Azure or Google. Like they are their own kind of cloud provider. So that's one. Another reason is that they've developed this kind of unique technology, V8 isolates, which is what this worker stuff is built on, that is sort of quicker to run. And it also has like different performance characteristics, like, spinning up a serverless worker is really fast. And most people who've worked with like Lambdas or GCP's equivalent thing, GCP functions, is, they're spinning something up a different kind of environment, and it's slower. And then I think the third thing is they might have a completely different strategy of being like super cheap for hobbyists,
Yeah, a lot of people say enterprise is paying for it.
Yeah. I have no insight into that, to be clear. Like that could be true, that could be false. I want to be clear here. We're not in a complete love fest for this infrastructure. And then I think the fourth thing I would add is that I don't think the DX of Cloudflare, is as good as Vercel.
Not even close. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think that there have been painful parts of working on this. Like the stack traces that I get out of the workers are pretty painful, to be honest. And I've kind of dorked around with trying to get source maps working the way that I want. Counterscale is also built in Remix. That's another random thing. I'd never done that before. So I didn't have a lot of familiarity with that stack, and it's got its own little server as well, as I understand, or it had its own kind of build tool, which they're switching over to Vite now. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, they are.
No, that's true.
Yeah, that's all accurate.
Everybody's becoming a Vite app these days.
Yep.
So while building this, like I was getting some pretty gnarly stack traces, and debugging stuff was hard. Just want to be clear, right?
Yeah.
But I think, for me, I think in some ways this was a little bit of an exercise and a and a mission to see if it was possible, and I was willing to sort of put up with those challenges, just to make this happen. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always interesting, the Cloudflare stuff. I find like I've launched, I don't know, I probably have like 4, I don't know if you call them production apps, but 4 real things that I use daily running in Cloudflare. And
on workers or what?
On workers and pages. So my last one was I got Next.js, server components, app router, like all the brand new Next.js and React stuff, all running on Cloudflare with a D1 SQLite database. It wasn't without its like hiccups. Like I went into the Discord probably 6 times over building the entire thing. And that seems to be the thing with Cloudflare, is that it will do it all. It will do it all really fast, really cheaply. And there's often some gotchas. Like you often have to think about it from the start of like, how am I going to approach this in the Cloudflare way? And I think they're trying to slowly get away from that, because a lot of people like, oh, I'm going to host it on Cloudflare. And then you hit one of the blockers and you're like, oh, it times out, oh, I need a long running database connection. Oh, I need WebSockets. Like they fixed the database connection thing. They fixed the WebSocket thing, they're fixing a lot of that stuff. But it still is not exactly where it needs to be.
Yeah. I've hosted on Pages specifically, but I've always had just a fair enough easy experience with adapter patterns, right? You just push it live. I think I wonder a lot about that HonoJS, since Cloudflare, did they acquire HonoJS? What was the situation there?
They hired the like lead dev behind HonoJS, and then a couple months later, Hono rolled out like front end support, which is I think it's their Hono is trying to be, because Hono was just an express alternative that works on everything, right? Like it's just request, response, fetch. And then like what I found myself being like is like I would start something in Hono and then I go, you know what? I need a UI. And then I would just move to Next.js or move to Remix or something like that. And I think that they don't want people jumping off there, because now you can run, they replicated most of the React hooks, and they replicated like state management and all of that good stuff in Hono. So like maybe Hono is going to be their Next.js.
Maybe.
Pretty interesting stuff. Yeah.
Let's take a detour here into Syntax and Sentry 1 year later. Syntax, we joined Sentry last March, end of March. We did our big announcement on our 600th episode. We had David on to talk about that. And it has been one whirlwind year of a lot of stuff. Maybe not half of which, a quarter of which Ben was on sabbatical for. But when Ben showed up, we were kind of, I don't want to say directionless, but we were a team of, folks who have been doing this all very, cowboy coding type of deal. We're working on the site kind of, we're very siloed. We're working on our projects. We're working on our site. We're used to being stallions, as Wes would say. And we definitely needed a tamer in-house. And Ben kind of showed up and whipped us into shape. And ever since Ben has showed up, it feels like the amount of progress we've made as a team has just kind of blown up completely. So, Ben, do you want to give a quick overview of your role on Syntax and like what you do for the team for people who don't know?
My title is general manager, so technically, I like to describe myself as the corporate wrangler, the sort of go between between Sentry and Syntax. And I think it's worth talking about that, because you talk about it on the show, but probably never heard it from someone like me. That's like, we run Syntax pretty independently. Wes and Scott and the team run, content and figure out what they want to talk about, what they want to write about. And I think that, going back to my role is to sort of empower you guys, these guys. I'm like, who am I talking to here? To just kind of achieve what they want to do. So, what has that been? I mean, I think an early moment for us was getting everybody together and into an onsite and really just talking about like, what do we want this to be in a year?
Yeah.
Right. I'm trying to set the stage for listeners here, but It was like, getting into a room, talking about what we wanted to do, and then working backwards, like what would we need to do between now and this kind of like result that we wanted. And we wanted to do more stuff on YouTube. We wanted to reach more people. We wanted to make better episodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that turned into, hey, well, let's hire a producer. What does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that initial getting us into a room and talking about, actual tangible SMART goals or whatever for us, even though you didn't come to us and say, hey, we need SMART goals. But it was more or less like, what can this be and where can we get? I think that was the biggest thing for us. But, one thing that I think we've all been very appreciative on your end and on Sentry's end in general is that there's been a distinct do not mess up the vibes angle from everyone. We all know what could happen if the vibes are off or if, corporate overlords do come in and kind of ruin what's going on. But I think that has been a focus of Sentry from the start. And specifically, Ben has always been, I do not want to mess up the vibes. And I think you've done a really awesome job with that. So, hopefully the audience feels the same way. That the goal here is just to take what we are doing and do it better and scale it up and be more efficient. What did you do to not mess up the vibes? You join an established media product. How do you not mess up the vibes?
It's good that we started this episode with, by the way, someone fell through, so we threw Ben in here, rather than like, here's the apology tour, right?
Yeah.
Like, I swear we didn't ruin it. The way I think about it is, I feel like this is like the trope movie thing that we've all seen 100 times. This just feels like you've seen this situation depicted many times, where this kind of great thing joins a bigger company, and then people kind of meddle with it, right? And sometimes I maybe could see that perspective, because maybe there are a bunch of reasons why they feel that they need to meddle with it. It's like, just let them cook. I don't know. Yes. I'm trying to, it's, I think, there's a lot of like, don't fix what's not broken. Right. And so I guess I don't really have a coherent answer for this, Scott. I'm sorry.
No. I think that just let them cook describes it all. I mean, if we go back to our tried and true tested method of using food metaphors for everything, you are basically the general manager of a restaurant here, and Wes and I are cooking up, and now we got another chef in, we got a expediter in, we got all the parts in, and you're the one ordering up the food and making sure we have what we need, and
like most of what Ben does is make it so that we can do more, be effective. Merch is a good example, right? Like, we never had Syntax merch, not because we didn't want to, but we just never had the infrastructure, the taxes, the time, all of that stuff, right? And so like Ben will tackle an order like that, and he does everything from like figuring out how much, talking through how much should a t-shirt cost, what are our costs here? Do we need to go to a different fulfillment provider, which we just did, all the way to just like Ben was searching how much does ice cost right before this call, because we are going to React Miami and we want to have a bunch of beer for people, like there's just like stuff like that. Can not to say that Ben is like just doing Ben does the stuff we don't want to do, but like it's a lot of like bigger picture stuff of trying to organize and figure out how to tackle these things so that we can do fun stuff, like have merch and have beer at React Miami, and have on-sites and plan more YouTube stuff. And so far it's working out really well.
Yeah, I forgot about the store. That's fun.
Yeah.
Thank you to all the people who bought from the store, by the way. And if I emailed you and told you that sometimes the shirt was late, I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry. Okay, my bad. But we tried our best.
Yeah, the fulfillment software stuff was a wild task, and I think Wes and I would have been very overwhelmed very quickly trying to handle all that stuff on top of doing the show. Personally, though, for you, how does it feel like going from a software project to a media project? Like, how different is that?
That is a very good question, and probably one that I get all the time when I explain to people what my job is, which usually takes like 10 minutes at parties and so on. I'm like, oh, what do you do? Whew.
I order ice for a bunch of guys to talk about JavaScript.
Yeah. I'm trying to avoid going like crazy deep on this. I think that, my experience as a software manager and as a senior engineering manager person is finding really great people and then getting everybody aligned ideally on like what they want to do. Okay. It doesn't always work out perfectly that way in engineering, but as much as possible, try to figure out what people are interested in and try to find a great fit for them. And then, but not really get in the way. It's kind of strange because I wrote a book on JavaScript. So I certainly have opinions on, how many spaces there should be in a tab and code editors and all that. But those are really minor, very minor details that are really not going to affect anybody's success, really. Really just kind of the big picture stuff. That's what I would be doing with software people. And I think that idea I don't find is too different from what you all do. So that's why I have very little to say about sometimes micro criticisms on the shows, although sometimes I do. I share some feedback, but mostly from hey, what do you think about this? I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know if for everybody this would make a lot of sense, but I think for the way that I like to work with software development teams, which is really high level, hold people to goals, get people to match them with their interests as much as possible. Like, does that sound like software engineering or does it sound like just sort of general, working with teams? I think it's more of the latter.
That's a good point. And even just you expressing all of that made me realize how similar that is, because that is all you're doing with us in a very positive way. So yeah, I would never have put that together, but yeah. And not too different.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, strangely, I have a lot of anxiety about being on this podcast, but I have no anxiety about blasting open source code. So there's certainly some differences. I want to be clear.
You had to download TikTok.
I do think that one thing working with you all that is and working in, I guess, more media is, look, I think that software developers love learning. I think there's something it's kind of the job, right? The technology is always changing. That's part of why this exists. The techniques are always changing, like the tools. So I think, to get into podcasts and YouTube and that kind of stuff, hey, that's learning too. At least it is for me. And I enjoy, I've learned so much working with you all. Like I'm really the student here, to be frank, and to level up my CSS, as I've commented earlier, it's been a lot of fun. So I think, I don't know if this is a great answer. This is a personal answer for me, is that I've personally really enjoyed just kind of learning new skills, just as I think many software developers would, so I don't know.
Nice. Oh, one last one. How do you sell syntax internally to Sentry? I know a lot of people might be wondering about, like, is it clicks? Are you tracking clicks? Like, how do you sell what we do here to a company that has very real income from products?
Yeah, that's a super good question. And I think even maybe a chance to, offer some transparency on that, right? I think that one thing that I learned from being a senior software engineering manager is internal storytelling is really important. So a lot of things I would do with software teams is really encourage them to, talk about their successes, whether we, even anything from upgrading like a really gnarly dependency to, optimizing some code. And we still do that a lot internally at Sentry. And I think you can see that even on Twitter from the software people or the product people who work on those things. They often talk about it still. And so I think that's it's very similar to what we do, right? Our goal is really just to grow the reach of the podcast and, lightly sprinkle some Sentry on there, which we do during the intro. So really, like most of how we communicate the success is really syntax is success, right? If we're doing great on platforms, if our listeners are up, which they have been, we just sort of tell that story internally and try to explain, what is it that we're doing that we think is driving this. We don't have marketing leads or, hard numbers that we're trying to hit. I think the company is really just sort of pretty down with, look, we're pretty transparent and clear that Sentry produces the show. The show continues to be good. We hope that the audience recognizes that. And that's what we're going for.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Scott and Wes's wild ride here. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think hopefully people appreciate and see that type of thing as well, where it's not just become a podcast about fixing bugs or a podcast about tracking what's going on with your website, because it's like there's so many sad stories of companies bringing on a piece of media and just absolutely ruining it. And I've been really happy with how everything's gone so far, because we get to do more things rather than less things.
Or worse things. They get to be better.
Yes, yes, true.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we have a full-time producer now. We have YouTube, which is something that we just launched. We have CJ, who's able to create supplementary content and throw up stuff on video. So it's been all good, in my opinion.
Yeah, we have Caitlin rocking the newsletter and making sure everybody knows what we're doing.
Yes.
I think even to bring this like full circle, we started with this talk about Counterscale, this project, and Cloudflare stuff. I think something that I left out of that is, not only did I just kind of want to make this for my website, but I think in working with you all and wanting to, have a great show and to have great education about what's going on in our industry for developers, like as a general manager, I feel the need to, invest my time and to work with new tools and just try to reacclimate myself into what's going on. And I think that was a little bit, a small driver in working on that project. So I do want to kind of add that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very fitting with what we're kind of about here. One of the episodes I think that's coming out, it's coming out very soon. It's out by the time you listen to this, I think, is all about, you have a wild idea. How do you quickly explore that idea? And that's like very much the feel of like what we're trying to do around here. So I love that, beyond just managing the team, you're diving into what we're doing in those regards, but also you're making videos. You learned video editing. You learned the social media platforms we're pushing out to. It's like, I think that all really, really helps.
What a wild stack to, like, I often think about how hilarious it is, the stuff you do in a single day of like I just said, ordering ice, building and describing columnar databases, and then trying to understand all the media outlets that are out there, which is, I think it's pretty wild that you can touch so many different areas. And that's also what makes this job so exciting for me as well, being able to touch upon everything.
Being invited onto a podcast an hour before we recorded it. Yeah.
We need the syntax. You know how there's the epic stack? We should have the syntax stack. And that also includes, all the video and audio, descriptions, tools.
All of the stuff.
Yeah.
The syntax stack. It's true. Honestly, I was thinking that we should do like have Randy on at some point and just talk video editing. Because anytime I post anything on Twitter about video editing, everybody is tuning in. Like a good chunk of developers also make videos, and they're always interested in what the editing stack and the process looks for that. And that's just one little part of the syntax stack.
Word.
Syn stack.
Syn stack.
You heard it here.
Yeah.
All right, let's move into the last section of the show, which is sick picks and shameless plugs. Ben, you got a sick pick for us?
Okay. I was just thinking of this one because we were talking about the syntax stack, and we were talking about Randy and production. And I think it would be fun to even have Randy talk about microphones and stuff, right? Like,
yeah,
look, here's a little preamble to the sick picks, but a couple decades ago, you have to buy nice suits to go into the office or nice wardrobe, blouses, etc. Right now, a lot of people are working remotely from their homes. And on the topic of this sort of stack and audio production, like, Randy's talked about, $50 microphones that are really great. Like there are tools out there that could kind of like raise your professional acumen inside of your company. I think that's interesting. And on that note, I guess, because I was thinking about this, there's a software that's yet to be released called Boom. It's an independent little company here in Toronto. Getboom.app. I think it's launching in a week or two. And this is sort of like, it's a virtual camera that lets you just sort of put professional overlays onto your camera output so that you can just kind of like go into Zoom calls and Google Meet and you can have your title on there. You can have a logo, or you can add some filters, right? It's
Wow, cool. Yeah.
it's like having like a Snapchat camera, but for the professional setting is what they're going for. I happen to have a beta version. I got an early access, and I was playing around with it with CJ actually earlier this week. I think it's pretty neat. So that's my sick pick. A little weird because it's not, it might be out by the time this launches, but take a look.
That's awesome. It's true. Like we were saying on the episode that came out last week of like how to level up at your job. And like one of them was like, get a half decent microphone and camera and stop the whole, sorry, my internet is crappy. Like figure it out. Like, like that's part of your job is communicating with people, and get it dialed in, because that's part of communicating well is getting your tech set up all right. And like I'm imagining it allow you to share stuff right over your webcam, so you don't have to do the whole, can everybody see my screen? Beautiful. And a shameless plug. What do you got for us? Counterscale?
Yeah, that's an easy one. And I really want to preamble this. Like this is really like a personal project that is not some super deep thing. I designed it for my 30 visitors a month blog, to be clear, right?
But it looks great.
Yeah.
It looks in functions great, yeah.
I think this plug is, hey, check it out. It's counterscale.dev. There's a website, and you can actually browse the dashboard and take a look, and then there's a link to GitHub in there. But if you think this is interesting, like I would love for people to open up issues, pull requests, try it. I'd really love for this to be a community project, not a me project. So that's my sick pick.
Wicked. Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, Ben. Appreciate it. And we will catch you later.
See you guys. See you on Slack.
See you on Slack.